Before kingdoms rose, before colonial borders were drawn, before the world knew the name Côte d'Ivoire, there was land, there were rivers older than memory, and there were people, hunters, farmers, builders of invisible histories. This is not just the story of a country. This is the story of migration, power, survival, and identity. A story shaped by trade, by war, by colonial rule, by struggle, and by rebirth. Tonight we travel across centuries, from ancient settlements to powerful kingdoms, through slavery, colonization, independence, civil war, and the rise of modern Côte d'Ivoire, a nation that fell and stood again. Before we begin this long journey through history, if you value deep African history, untold stories, and powerful documentaries like this, please support this work, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join a community preserving real history. Now, let us go back to a time before kingdoms. Long before written history, long before empires and European ships, the land we now call Côte d'Ivoire was already alive with human movement. Archaeological traces reveal early hunter-gatherer societies living deep within the forests and savannas. These early inhabitants were not primitive. They were adaptive, intelligent, and deeply connected to nature. They understood the rhythm of rain, the language of animals, the power of rivers. Over centuries, waves of migration reshaped the region. From the north came Gur-speaking peoples. From the east came Akan groups. From the west came Kru and Manda communities. Each brought new traditions, new beliefs, new systems of leadership. Villages formed, farming expanded, iron tools appeared, and slowly, society began to organize. Not yet kingdoms, but foundations of civilization. Spiritual life shaped everything. People believed in ancestor spirits, nature gods, sacred forests, and unseen forces guiding human destiny. The land was not owned. It was shared between the living and the dead. Trade routes began forming between communities. Salt, gold, cola nuts, animal skins. These early exchanges connected people across forests and savanna long before foreign contact. Leadership emerged through wisdom, age, and spiritual authority. Not conquest, but change was coming. Across West Africa, powerful kingdoms were rising, and soon, Côte d'Ivoire would enter its age of states and empires.
The land was no longer silent. Villages had grown into communities. Trade had expanded quietly.
And families began identifying as peoples. From these foundations, kingdoms began to emerge. Not overnight, not by force alone, but slowly, like roots spreading beneath the forest floor. In the heart of the forest, one story became legend. A queen, a migration, a sacrifice. The Baoulé traced their origin to Queen Ablapoku, a royal woman who led her people westward during conflict in the Ashanti lands. They crossed rivers, they crossed dense forests, and when the river would not let them pass, legend says a sacrifice was made. From loss came survival. From survival came a nation of people. The Baoulé settled in central Côte d'Ivoire. Farmers, artists, builders, and guardians of tradition. Their carvings, masks, and spiritual practices still breathe today, a living connection to their ancestors. The forest whispered their stories. Far to the north, another kingdom rose, not in forests, but on the savanna. The Kong Empire became a hub of commerce and learning. Merchants carried gold, salt, cloth, and knowledge across the Sahara. Islamic scholars arrived. Mosques rose. Books were written. Law and faith intertwined. Kong became a bridge between forest and desert, between Africa's interior and the wider world. Knowledge flowed, ideas traveled, culture spread, trade routes connected kingdoms, and kingdoms connected peoples. In the lush eastern forests, wealth shaped destiny. The Agni and Ivory kingdoms built strength on gold trade, fertile land, and political organization. Kings ruled with councils. Communities were structured. Trade routes became lifelines, connecting forest villages to distant lands. Gold moved north, salt moved south. Markets thrived, societies strengthened. Even then, life was measured in rhythm. Farmers rose with the sun, drums carried news across villages, masks spoke the language of ancestors, stories taught law and history. Civilization was alive, even before foreign ships touched the coast. By the 1400s and 1500s, distant forces stirred. Empires expanded beyond borders. Trade intensified across the Sahara and the Atlantic. Europe looked outward, seeking new routes and riches. The forests of Côte d'Ivoire still stood strong, but the horizon was no longer empty. Ships would arrive, traders, explorers, and eventually colonizers, each bringing change that would ripple across centuries. And yet within the kingdoms, life carried on. Through crops, ceremonies, masks, and drums, through kinship and community, the spirit of Côte d'Ivoire endured.
This convergence point near the Niger River is crucial for the southern Sahara route.
The caravans must pass through here before reaching the Fezzan.
As the 15th century unfolded, the forests and savannas of Côte d'Ivoire were no longer isolated. Beyond the rivers, beyond the villages, a network of trade and knowledge reached across the Sahara. Islamic scholars, traders, and travelers brought ideas that would reshape the land. This was a time of connection, learning, and exchange. The arrival of Islamic-influenced merchants traveled long distances, from Timbuktu to Gao, to Kong and beyond. Gold, salt, and kola nuts moved with them. But so did knowledge, faith, and culture. Mosques were built along trade routes. Schools and centers of learning flourished. Scholarship became a way of life. Even forested kingdoms felt the pull of this new world. Islam offered law, literacy, and networks of influence. It connected northern Côte d'Ivoire to vast empires, Mali, Songhai, and beyond. The desert winds carried ideas as much as they carried trade. The Kong Empire, already a hub of commerce, embraced this new influence. Traders from the north brought Arabic script, mathematics, and legal knowledge. Cities became places of learning, debate, and governance. Kong was not only a trading post, it was a meeting point of civilizations. Here kingdoms learned diplomacy, commerce, and the rules of empire. The forests and savannas of the south watched quietly, and slowly the pulse of northern influence spread. Trans-Saharan trade routes were lifelines. Gold flowed north, salt flowed south. Ivory, kola nuts, and slaves were also traded. Alongside goods, ideas traveled. Mathematics, astronomy, religious thought. Trade brought prosperity, but also change. New wealth shifted power. Communities adapted. Societies became interconnected in ways previously unimaginable. Even remote villages felt the ripple of these networks. Farmers, artisans, and chiefs learned of distant empires. And with knowledge came ambition. By the 16th century, northern influence had left its mark. Islamic faith, scholarship, and commerce became part of the fabric of life. Even kingdoms like Baoulé, Agni, and Abran maintained spiritual traditions, yet they engaged with new ideas, building stronger, more structured societies. The stage was being set. The forests and rivers were no longer barriers. Europeans had already begun sailing along the coasts, and the world beyond Africa's shores was beginning to look inward. By the late 15th century, distant sails appeared on the horizon. European ships, first Portuguese, then Dutch, British, and French, had begun navigating the West African coast. The rivers and estuaries of Côte d'Ivoire would soon witness the first encounters between local peoples and foreign travelers. Trade, curiosity, and opportunity brought these visitors. They came seeking gold, ivory, and the fertile lands along the coast. But they also brought new diseases, technologies, and ambitions. Ivorians along the coast observed these strangers carefully. Initial exchanges were cautious. Trade began with local goods, ivory, gold, and cola nuts, for European tools, textiles, and firearms. Some coastal communities welcomed the opportunity, but the Europeans had a different vision. Their interest was not only in trade, but also in influence and control. Small alliances formed, often temporary and fragile. The landscape of power along the coast began to shift. Portuguese explorers were the first to arrive in the 1400s. They mapped the coastline. They traded goods, sometimes peacefully, sometimes forcefully. By the 1600s, Dutch, British, and French merchants had established forts and trading posts. These posts became centers of commerce. They were gateways for goods, ideas, and, tragically, the emerging transatlantic slave trade. Europeans brought firearms and metal tools, which altered local power balances. Kings and chiefs began to negotiate with new allies and to fear new threats. Interactions were not only economic. European religion, language, and culture touched the coast. Missionaries arrived, spreading Christianity. Local rulers selectively engaged with these ideas, blending them with indigenous traditions. Yet tension simmered. European ambitions were often at odds with local authority. What began as trade slowly became a contest for influence. By the 1700s, Côte d'Ivoire's coastal societies were transformed. New trade routes emerged. European forts dotted the shore. Local leaders learned diplomacy with foreign powers. But not all change was welcome. The stage was being set for a darker era. The transatlantic slave trade would soon touch the land. By the 1700s, the coast of Côte d'Ivoire had become a focal point in the transatlantic slave trade. European forts and trading posts grew in number, marking the beginning of a profound transformation. Communities that had traded freely now faced demands and pressures from distant markets. Rivers and ports carried not only goods, but human lives destined for faraway continents. Slavery was not an abstraction, it was a human tragedy. Families were torn apart, villages were raided, communities disrupted. The inland kingdoms faced new challenges. They had to negotiate with traders, defend their people, or sometimes participate in the trade themselves to survive. The rhythms of life, farming, ceremony, and community were deeply affected. Along the coast, European influence deepened. Local leaders adopted new trade practices. Some gained wealth and power, others lost autonomy. The arrival of firearms and new technologies altered local conflicts. Trade networks expanded, connecting the interior to the coast and beyond. But with opportunity came dependence. The land, the people, and the culture were now tied to global commerce. The slave trade reshaped society. Some ethnic groups were displaced. Others became intermediaries between Europeans and inland communities. European customs, languages, and religion slowly penetrated coastal areas, yet indigenous traditions persisted. By the late 1700s, Côte d'Ivoire's coastline had been transformed. Trade forts and ports defined new geography. Social hierarchies adapted to foreign influence. The consequences of the slave trade would echo for generations. Inland kingdoms learned to navigate this new reality. The balance of power shifted. The stage was set for the arrival of full colonization by European powers. By the late 1800s, European powers were no longer content with coastal trade alone. France, asserting its influence across West Africa, moved inland. Côte d'Ivoire, rich in resources and strategically located, became a target. The era of direct colonization had begun. European explorers mapped the rivers, forests, and savannas. Treaties, often coerced, were signed with local chiefs. Boundaries were drawn on paper, often ignoring the realities of villages, kingdoms, and ethnic groups. French administrators established forts, offices, and garrisons. The French aimed to extract resources. Cocoa, coffee, timber, and ivory were highly prized. Local populations were now tied to global markets through colonial systems. Traditional political structures were challenged. Some chiefs collaborated to preserve influence. Others resisted. Rebellions arose across the forests and savannas. Villagers and warriors fought to defend their land, their identity, and their freedom. But the French, with superior weapons and organization, gradually imposed authority. Colonial rule reshaped everyday life. Forced labor, taxation, and administrative laws changed the rhythm of work in society. Education, language, and religion were used as tools of control. Yet even under pressure, cultural traditions endured. Colonization brought roads, railways, and ports, but for extraction, not equality. Cities like Abidjan and San Pedro began to grow under French influence. The economy was reorganized to serve French interests. Labor migrations created new social dynamics. The foundations of modern Côte d'Ivoire were laid during this period. Borders, infrastructure, and administrative structures shaped by France remain today. Colonial policies would later influence education, law, and governance. Yet beneath the imposed order, the people maintained cultural memory and resilience.
In the dense rainforests of what is now Côte d'Ivoire, tribal conflicts were frequent and fierce, shaping the region's early history.
The French had established authority across Côte d'Ivoire. Colonial administrators controlled cities, ports, and trade. But the land was vast, and the spirit of the people remained unbroken. Resistance simmered beneath the surface.
We must resist the colonial invaders. Our ancestors demanded.
They fought bravely, ensuring our stories would live on.
Daily life under colonial rule was hard. Forced labor and taxes changed village rhythms. Young men were conscripted to work on plantations, railways, and ports. Families endured hardship, yet traditions continued quietly. Schools taught French language and culture. Missionaries spread Christianity alongside education. Education was limited and often for the elite. Communities adapted, learning to navigate the new system while keeping their own ways. Not all chiefs accepted colonial authority. Rebellions occurred across forests and savannas. Some were suppressed swiftly. Others persisted, gaining legendary status in oral histories. Cocoa and coffee plantations expanded under French control. Timber and ivory were exported at high volumes. Local labor supported global markets while families struggled. Colonial policies reshaped the land and its people. Despite pressures, culture endured. Baoulé, Senyufo, Dan, Bete, Ani preserved language, rituals, and identity. Masks, ceremonies, and oral history became tools of cultural survival. The memory of past kingdoms and struggles lived on. Resistance was subtle, persistent, deeply human. Every small act kept the spirit of Côte d'Ivoire alive. By mid-20th century, a new generation of leaders was emerging. They would challenge colonial rule politically, socially, and culturally. By the mid-20th century, the winds of change were undeniable. Across Africa, colonial rule was being challenged. Côte d'Ivoire was no exception. A new generation of leaders was ready to shape the nation's destiny. Félix Houphouët-Boigny, the father of independence. Born into the Baoulé community, he became a symbol of hope. He navigated both Ivorian tradition and French politics. A doctor, politician, and diplomat, he understood the power of unity. Political parties emerged to challenge colonial authority. The Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire, PDCW, united diverse ethnic groups. Campaigns emphasized education, infrastructure, and equality. The people's voices grew stronger with every election and petition. Negotiating independence was delicate. Houphouët-Boigny balanced cooperation and assertiveness. The goal was self-determination, not rebellion. In 1960, Côte d'Ivoire achieved independence, peacefully and proudly. Early nation-building was challenging, integrating diverse ethnic groups, building infrastructure, creating institutions. Stability became a priority. Roads, schools, and hospitals were built rapidly. National identity emphasized unity and diversity. Citizens were encouraged to look beyond ethnic divisions. National pride began to flourish. The foundation was laid for a remarkable post-colonial story. After independence, Côte d'Ivoire entered an era of remarkable growth. Under Houphouët-Boigny, stability allowed the nation to thrive. The world began to notice the Ivorian Miracle. A country that had emerged from colonial rule now seemed unstoppable. Agricultural wealth fueled the economy. Cocoa became the backbone of national prosperity. Coffee plantations flourished. Small farmers and estates contributed to national wealth. Roads stretched across forests, schools opened, hospitals provided care. Abidjan became a modern African hub. Factories, ports, and commercial centers grew. Foreign investment flowed. Markets thrived. Trade expanded across the nation. Education and culture flourished. Arts and music thrived. Urban life blended tradition with modernity. Ivorians celebrated identity while embracing progress. Yet challenges persisted. Economic reliance on a few exports made the nation vulnerable. Urbanization brought inequalities. Some regions remained underdeveloped. Despite decades of growth, cracks appeared beneath the Ivorian Miracle. By the late 1980s, commodity prices fell. Debt increased. Jobs disappeared. Frustration spread across cities and villages. The death of Houphouët-Boigny in 1993 left a leadership void. Political factions emerged. Ethnic and regional tensions surfaced. Unity that had sustained the nation began to weaken. In December 1999, the first military coup occurred. The government collapsed overnight. Fear spread through streets. Citizens realized peace was fragile. Debates over identity intensified. Who truly belonged to Côte d'Ivoire? North against South, citizens versus migrants. Civil war erupted in 2002. The country split in two. The North rebelled. The South remained under the government. Everyday life carried fear. Markets slowed. Schools and hospitals struggled. Ordinary citizens bore the consequences. Yet Ivorians demonstrated resilience. Communities clung to hope. Culture and tradition provided strength. Even in darkness, spirit endured. International peacekeepers arrived. Diplomacy sought reconciliation. Negotiations slowly restored stability. The nation prepared to rise again. After years of conflict, Côte d'Ivoire began to heal. The nation rose from division, cities rebuilt, roads reconnected villages, citizens restored trust, government and communities engaged in dialogue. Peace agreements provided reconciliation. North and South slowly coexisted. Economic recovery began. Cocoa and coffee returned to markets. New industries emerged. Infrastructure, energy, and technology fueled growth. Social progress flourished. Education expanded. Healthcare improved. Young Ivorians balanced tradition and modernity. International engagement strengthened. Diplomatic ties grew. Tourism and trade thrived. The nation's resilience inspired Africa and the world. Everyday heroes carried the nation. Farmers tended fields. Teachers shaped minds. Entrepreneurs built businesses. Through struggle, Côte d'Ivoire found identity, a nation reborn from adversity, guided by hope and vision. The story of modern Côte d'Ivoire was being written.
In the heart of the village, the masks emerged to tell the ancient stories of our people.
Beyond politics, beyond conflict, lies the heart of Côte d'Ivoire, its culture, identity, and spirit. A nation defined by people, traditions, creativity. A living story, not only events. The soul of the nation thrives in over 60 ethnic groups. Baoulé, Senufo, Dan, Bete, Agni, and more. Each with language, customs, and history. Together they form one nation. Tradition is life itself. Masks speak ancestral voices. Drums carry messages. Dance tells stories of survival. Modern creativity blossoms. Young entrepreneurs innovate. Artists redefine culture. Musicians blend traditional and global rhythms. Education and technology open doors. History lives in memory and dreams. Youth imagine futures beyond the past. A future of unity, progress, and hope. Everyday life writes history. Farmers rise with the sun. Market women trade wisdom. Artisans carve memory into wood, cloth, and stone. Côte d'Ivoire has endured kingdoms, colonization, independence, conflict, and healing. Through it all, the spirit remains. The next chapter belongs to a new generation, a chapter of resilience, identity, and hope. If this journey through history, culture, and identity has moved you, support it, like the documentary. Subscribe and share. History lives only when it is remembered. Rest now and let the echoes of Côte d'Ivoire stay with you.